Uh, this is a brief um, update on the kind of the week and the semester and what I'm planning to do for the remainder of the summer, and kind of what my videos might be about. Um, is the semester's ended, and my Tuesday class or Thursday class is completed. I've got 2 lectures left for my Monday, Wednesday class, and it's the same class, Comparative Religions. But the last chapter is on religion's future, the future of religion in the world. And so what I'll do is, I've had concepts going throughout the semester. Specifically, when we got to Judaism and Christianity, I emphasized, at least with Christianity, Kant, the rise of liberal Protestantism, and kind of many of the primarily scientific changes, but also some of the social changes. Um, I laid out an argument for why the response of Germany in World War II was directly tied to a form of religious underpinnings in relation to kind of the identity of the liberal Protestants in Germany. Um, and it's not a unique argument. It's been made before. Even Jordan Peterson makes an argument in his, I think, Maps of Meaning class about how the move in Nazi Germany, which he argues follows from Nietzsche, and I don't think he's wrong on that, was a vastly religious move. So, not in the sense of not in the sense of what most people think about it, but in a totally different sense. So, anyway, I enjoy this lecture for a few reasons. One is I have them read Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. I used to have them read portions of Nietzsche's The Gay Science, particularly the issue of God is dead, we have killed him. And I didn't have them read that this semester. Of course, people in the Thursday class ended up not reading the Russell argument anyway, which made it a very one-sided discussion, which I was a little miffed at. But I mean, end of the semester, I get why. So, but anyway, the main setup is I point out how worldwide religion is actually increasing. By 2050, there will be an equal amount of Muslims in the world to Christians. In fact, they might even surpass. Christianity is growing in China. Within, I think, 7 or 8 years, China will actually be the most Christian nation, like the most people in the world who are Christians, which is just mind-boggling. And interestingly enough, it's primarily Catholic Christianity. The global South, so Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, as well as South America, also seeing a rise in Christianity. Although through some interesting forms, right? South American Christianity tends to, at least from the perspective of Northerners who are, reading material, have kind of a Marxist liberation flair, whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, what tends to be, from my friend's experience there, a form of prosperity preaching. So, and of course in Russia you see a rebooming of the Orthodox Church. So, the question is, of course, what's wrong with Europe and what's wrong with North America? Like, why are they not doing this? And there were a few things I pointed out in class to describe it, and it's actually what I tend to leave the class with as a think about it thing. So, if you start with Plato and Aristotle, you have this idea that you can look at the natural world and you can infer order, right? This might be what religions would call intuition, or some form of contemplation, okay, religiously. And a lot of religions would argue still you have to be trained to do this, right? Even Plato, I mean, it's not like you just look at it and do it. It takes practice, right? It takes a type of either ethical or thought process. It's not just automatic. Okay. But this would allow the universe itself to exhibit marks of, the creator, for instance, if you were thinking about purpose and epistemology. It also allowed, in many ways, sacramental churches to see the universe itself as the way God operates to human beings. And this not only legitimates the sacraments, specifically, like For instance, why can baptism convey grace? Well, that was the original purpose of the water itself anyway, was to convey this type of grace. In other words, the making of the holy water rescues it from the kind of the demonic overpinning, which prevents its connection to God. But you also have that then with the incarnation, and the incarnation is always an interesting doctrine to talk about with these issues, but we didn't talk about it in class because that's not the purpose of the class. But if you start off with this idea of meaning being able to be inferred, okay, a formal meaning or a final meaning, skepticism, it existed, but it wasn't the same situation. Then you have Kant, and Kant severs the ability to look at the natural world to get to the thing in and of itself, and then, of course, extrapolate back to God. Now, Kant, of course, still thought there was a God, but his argument was that it was primarily a rational argument. He almost reintroduces the ontological argument, and he adds the ethical argument to kind of to the argument for God's existence, which Russell will, of course, take issue with. But then you get Nietzsche, and what's interesting is there's a quote that I found from Nietzsche that references the cave again. Okay, in Plato's cave, the forms you saw, right? The cave is the realm of the not real, of the not fully, the situation. It's not the realm of ideas, at least in Plato. But when you leave the cave, you see the forms. You've broken, kind of the hold of just looking at the world and not seeing those. Okay, and so this might be theologically interpreted as something like, God is more real than I am. Okay, now for a modernist to say that, it would be crazy, because we think of real as primarily physical and interacting with us. But to say God is more real is simply to indicate I am a contingent being and God is not. And so in a Platonic element, that makes sense. Okay, so, but Nietzsche makes the argument that the belief in God will last within caves, and he's specifically flipping Plato's cave. He's flipping the analogy to indicate that it's the seeing of meaning in anything, not just God, but meaning, as an illusion. Okay, and in reality, there's nothing behind it. And this is kind of a philosophical nihilism. And this, of course, this leads to some problems, right? Ever since Hume specifically, too, there's been typical recognition of the fact-value split, right? In other words, there is kind of scientific fact, and then there is value. Okay, you see this in modern discussions, for instance, when somebody says that sex, for instance, is a biological reality, so a fact, right? But gender is a social construct. Okay, that means that gender becomes more of a value, something that can either change or is not set in stone. And so you have one side that's either arguing all fact or all value, but the reality is there's a gap there, there's a gulf, and the modern human being is left with several options. The individual, kind of as we see them, has to deal with a world that is chaotic, a world that is filled with death, a world filled with suffering, and a world that, doesn't always have answers to questions, even if you are rational. And so you're left with a conundrum. The many are the one. Okay, that's not just an issue of ancient philosophy. That's an issue of how human beings have to operate. And so what I say is, especially these are college students, I say, when you were young, you were probably a member of a family, and you took pride that was your mommy or your daddy, unless of course an issue arose at home. But I said, once you became an adolescent, let me guess, everyone wants to be a special, snowflake. They don't want to be labeled. They don't want to be put in boxes. They want to assert that individuality, right? That will to power of the individual, something which Nietzsche, talks about. And you have that pull, the pull to be the individual, right? But at the same time, I said, but what do you want? You want to belong. You want to be part of a group. And so you have this tension, this paradox pulling you. And I said, and it comes out when I say, why are you buying the latest iPhone? Why are you buying the latest shoes? Oh, well, I want to belong. I want to care what everyone else thinks, which is funny because at the end of the day, they don't care what anyone else thinks. But it's the reality. They want to fit in. They don't want to look nerdy. They don't want to, for wanting to look like individuals, they don't want to look like individuals. And so you get this strange thing where once they start figuring that out, once they start realizing that what anyone else thinks about them in this scheme of Nietzsche doesn't matter, true nihilism sets in. Because it's, why are you buying that anyway? Well, I want to. Why? I mean, you could make a pragmatic argument, and that might be a way Hume might have argued that, but you're left with being torn between this paradox. I know John Zizioulas might call it the biological hypostasis, the mode of being of the individual who is not fully a person because they're not in communion, right? There's the struggle between the self and the other, and it's a struggle, it's not one that, it's a paradox, right? It cannot be resolved apart from, for his argument, the mode of being of the individual changing in baptism to the ecclesial hypostasis, and sharing in the love of the Holy Trinity that is communal, but at the same time does not eradicate your individuality, and in fact your personhood as an individual becomes more recognized. You know, or if you were to use the Pauline language, you would have one body, many members, right? Your individuality is that you are one of the members, but yet you're part of a body, you're part of a larger group. And that, for Paul, it's not just philosophical, it's mystical, theological, and spiritual. So, but I leave them with this, and I say, you know, the issue, and this is why I have them read Russell. Russell's not wrong when he goes through and says that religion is because people fear death. Okay. I mean, no matter what religion you really talk about, it's either, I mean, there's more things to religion than just this, but I definitely said death and chaos. And I said, even if you're a Chinese religion and you don't really talk much about the afterlife, you definitely talk about having an ordered life, or a life that is not fighting the chaos you're in, one that kind of blends and moves with it, right? Like a Taoist type of idea. But in Hinduism, escaping the samsara cycle. Death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth. In the Western religions, you have the resurrection of the dead. You die once, rise again. Okay, all of them are about escaping this death thing, as well as ordering chaos, seeing either a mind behind it in the Abrahamic religions, like, you know, God, the logos, or the word, or in Eastern religions, you have a meta-theological realm or thing, like karma, that is not a personal thing, but it's something that even the gods are subject to, right? Something that orders them and organizes them. So the issue, and this is just the primary issue, the issue is not, is it pragmatic? Because it is. Religion, especially prayer and meditation, have been shown to lower anxiety. It has been shown to, or at least certain elements of anxiety. It gives people a belongingness. It is part of culture, helps to organize social norms. It fulfills certain needs that human beings have, because human beings, as rational creatures, we need meaning, right? We need it. Okay. Without it, problems happen. And so I said, the issue is not that it's pragmatic. The issue is if it's true. Okay, so just because it's pragmatic does not mean it's false, but it also doesn't mean it's true. And that's where you run into the issue in the modern West of spiritual but not religious, right? We commodify everything, right? We want to buy and sell ideas. We want to take from here, take from here, take from here. Literally the definition of heresy, from the Greek eidesis for choice. And we want to apply these things almost uncontextually, almost. But like the new iPhone or iPad, like we're trying to find something. What fixes this problem? And then you have the skeptical side of it, which rides on the coattails of scientific success and is critical and it definitely has a place to ask questions like, is this true? But the reality is, in the modern Western mind, you can't determine it. And even if you could, does it matter? So my point to them was, why do I want a family? Why do I want to have children? And I said, I'll give you a hint. The reason I'm looking for is not companionship. That's a value. The fact is, I have genes. Those genes are something that I'm biologically driven to pass on. So, and this goes into some elements of evolutionary psychology, but I mean, if you were to do culture as a coping mechanism, okay, as a way of dealing with death and chaos and disorder, are you any better as a skeptic having the state replace that? And the state will replace it. You see that in different countries, right, where religious belief is low. There typically are stable governments, and especially socialist governments, ones that provide goods for everybody. And yet, when the government starts to fail, there have been studies done on this. The Science of Religion class from edX, which is a British Columbia class, they reference some of the psychologists, and they reference studies that show that the implicit belief in God rises, even if the explicit thing is still, no, I don't believe. There is, in the eyes of uncertainty, a willingness to seek solace somewhere. Again, doesn't say if it's true or not, just indicates it works. So I leave them with that. And with that, we move on to some other topics that are kind of more, I would say, fun, but at the same time, really bring up this issue of, human personhood, knowledge, the natural world, right? And I've told them several times, I said, my beef with modern science, my beef, is this understanding of we are not part of nature. And I know people will say, well, that's nonsense, of course we're part of nature, blah, 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 but no, you don't. It took quantum physics to help, and it took quantum mechanics to basically point out to you that you bring something to the experiment. You affect the experiment. It's not like you've developed a model or a method, and you are an omnipotent, detached person, right? I mean, and modern science doesn't even operate that way, right? You have to do grant writing. You have to kiss someone's butt. You have to have an outcome that is going to possibly be capable of being sold, right? Publish or Perish itself is based upon a model that involves an output, okay? And an output that typically involves money or something that's in demand. So this is not the detached, 18th, 19th century gentleman doing science, okay? It just doesn't work that way. And so this is, I think, another interesting point talking about religion and science is religion as an organized reality, right, as something that's been around, is not necessarily in competition with science, but science, broadly speaking, doesn't, I think, know what it is, right? I hear so many people talking about reproducibility, and yeah, that's true, reproducibility. What outcomes and experiments should convince someone? That's an epistemological question. But let's say I disagree with the Higgs boson experiment. Can I pull the cyclotron out of my pocket and redo the thing? No, I can't. Right? So I have to take some things on faith. So the idea that it's faith and knowledge is it's wrong. That's not a proper, I think, depiction. Faith is used a lot more by people than they think it is. It's the issue of religious belief that cannot be determined from nature. That is the problem in the question. And one could see, right, so, and I made the comment, right, science is not a lot of students still think that evolution, for instance, has a progressive thing, and I pointed this out for alternative religions. I said, modern alternative religions that say evolution mean progress, and that's scientifically not the case, okay? Because scientifically you're looking at a specific occurrence or an event, right? You're looking at a particular thing, and you're trying to extrapolate or infer to the universal principle behind it. So when you're looking at a particular event, right, you're looking at, say, a generation, right, or the evolution of a population, right, the change of an allele frequency. You're looking at survivability and reproducibility of the species, right? What's the best for reproduction and survival? You are saying nothing about an overarching scheme, and you are saying nothing about what rules can and can't be followed, apart from, at least in biology, mutation and natural selection. And yet, if you were to say, let's bracket that understanding, let's put it aside, and let's look at what we have as a history. You do see trends. You do see, multiply evolved things, right? For instance, in the presence of light, and with an organism that uses an electrical signal of some form, a nerve of some form, I would argue you will absolutely evolve eyes of some form. Be it the box jelly's form of eye, be it the arthropod eye, right? Be it the vertebrate eye, right? You're going to develop a form of an eye, something to sense light, because you are better off for doing that. Okay? Now, you can say, well, evolution doesn't work that way, but okay, then why did it do it 3 times? Okay, I mean, you're using the localized element, or the temporally localized element, but you're ignoring the big picture. You're ignoring what you actually see. Um, so, this is something that no one pays attention. No one bats an eye when we're looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, and we make certain assumptions about that. I know very few people who are atheistic, who accept the theory of evolution, that don't think that there's probably intelligent life somewhere in the universe, due to large numbers. Okay, but large numbers are still going to be operating under the standpoint of fixed laws and systems. Okay, right? The fact that I can drop a pen and it goes down towards the center of the large gravitational mass called the Earth is going to, for things on the Earth, limit forms. Okay, laws limit. Okay, they don't. Laws are not that creative. They're limiting factors, right? And this is something that I don't even think Dawkins fully understands about natural selection. It's not a creative thing. It is a sieve. Natural selection is literally a sieve, a temporally changing, always alternating sieve. Which mutation, which is the actual, creative change, gets siphoned through. Um, that's how it happens. It's you can talk about building from the ground up, but that's more philosophical than it is scientific, and that's fine. If you want to go that route, that's cool, but call it that. Don't pretend that because science has won many different advances that everything has to be scientific, right? I think this is personally the mistake of the analytical philosophers, trying to be scientifically rigorous. Rigorous is good, but you're following on the coattails of science because it's successful. That's literally like saying I want to follow on the coattails of religion because it was successful in this time period. It's being a follower, not being a leader or a discoverer. Now, I'm sure I'll get plenty of disagreements on that. I don't care. I really don't. So that's what I cover for the class. I cover some things like artificial intelligence and cloning, and then bringing back biodiversity, and then the responsibility, for instance, of who owns the animals, right? If we were to clone, say, the thylacines, the Tasmanian tigers again, do they have their own protections and rules, or are they owned by the person that did it as a result of the fact that they technically created it, like a drug or a synthetic bacteria? So, and how do religions respond to that? Or positive eugenics, how do religions respond to that? Which I think is dark and terrifying. I only wanted him to have blonde hair, blue eyes. Is that so bad? So, but anyway, the class is fun. I enjoy teaching it. I'm going to try to revamp it to have more of a text discussion. I try to do close readings with the students and have them do I have them do 2 assignments in addition to the research paper. One is to visit a religion that they are not a part of. So it doesn't have to be, like if they're Christian, or it doesn't have to be Hindu. But we do have a Hindu temple in town, and several have gone there. But it has to be not the denomination, right? So if they're, for instance, Roman Catholic, right, they can go to, say, Northwoods, which is a megachurch, right? I don't know if it's Willow Creek or not, but it's a megachurch. Originally, it was actually a Mennonite church, but I think it's since gone away from that. Or if they're, Lutheran, I'm okay if they go to the Catholic Mass, but it's still pretty similar. I'd rather they go somewhere else. And I work with them and kind of talk with them about, things to see. But the other one is a scripture analysis, and I specifically say to them, I don't want you in this. Like, this is not a reflection paper. This is not, I'm reading this thing there, and I think it says this and this and that. No, I want to know who was supposed to have written this, to whom were they supposed to have written this, what years was this supposed to have been written, and then what is the context within the Holy Book, right? So if you're looking at, say, the prophet Isaiah, okay, number one, he's held as holy by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Okay, so if you're just going to read it as a Christian, you're missing the point of what I'm trying to get at. What is that text? Okay. Secondly, Isaiah is a prophet, one of the major prophets. He's writing regarding Israel and Judah, judgment and exile. And there are supposedly at least two, and if not three, possible written sources of Isaiah: Proto, Deutero, and Trito. Okay, 1 through 39, 40 to 55, I think, and then 56 to 66. All written at different times. Okay, so when you give me this passage about being redeemed or being held up, I'm not disputing, and they didn't even say Jesus in this. It was just one student had one about everyday life, and I'm like, you're talking about people that are going to lose their children, are going to be unnationed, and you're talking about everyday life? Like, put yourself in their shoes and then say what you're saying. Stop putting yourself in here. Like, what are they saying? How do you think this hits them? Right? What is this saying about God at this point? What is this saying about Israel or Judah? It's one of those things where, like I tell the students, we'll cover theology. Like, we're going to cover what religions say about God, but I'm not asking you to do theology. I'm not doing theology. That's not the purpose of this class. This is a secular school. Okay? If we were at a, like, Eureka, yeah, fine. We'll talk about that stuff. Because it's a religious school, or at least a school that is a private school that allows for that discussion. But a public school, no. Stop bringing yourself in. Do a close, careful, critical reading of the text. Right? I'm not saying you have to believe that Moses didn't write the Torah, okay? But I'm asking you to at least be aware that other people may have written the Torah, and that's a fairly common belief. So, I'll try to have more practice with that, maybe as we go through the different religions and texts for the class. But anyway, that's partially what I'm going to be doing, is revamping the class. There are several papers I want to try to write and actually try to submit to journals for publication. We'll see how that goes. My first attempt at these. So one is going to be an ecumenical paper, an idea I had for a while, and I hope someone didn't take it in the Nordic Journal of Theology in 2008. But I'll have to read his paper and see. One is on science and theology, broadly speaking, or at least a theological principle or scientific principle applied to theology. And then finally another one is looking at the individual I wrote my master's thesis on, because I don't think there's, apart from him actively publishing because he's still alive, I don't think anyone has really attempted to use his methodology and apply it to biology, and I kind of want to see if that's possible. My thesis somewhat did it, and I found some of it wanting, but this of course goes to the general issue of science and religion, or science and theology, and the difficulty of saying that any way of comparing the two work, right? Like if you say they conflict, well, then why are you using a microwave oven? But if you also say that they are compatible, you're left with a fundamental problem, because if you are trying to say that, what typically happens is theology is going to have a dichotomy between the world and the internal life, the reality and the spiritual. This dualism that Kant kind of brought over in some ways from Descartes. That's cool until you get to the incarnation, and you have real problems. Like, okay, so this is the God-man, but is it the God and the man? Because that's Nestorianism, and that's supposed to be heresy, and for salvific reasons, as well as scriptural. So, I tend to think theologians don't think too carefully about that. And if they do, they don't tend to write about it that well. So, because most of the questions aren't really getting at individual or important questions, right? The fundamental issue, right? Okay, so let's assume evolutionary biology. Let's just assume it's true. Okay, no scientific argument or whatever. No intelligent design. No issue of contingency. No nothing. It's the overarching mythology and paradigm of the modern age. So, if that's the explanatory reason, let's use it. the issue is not design. The issue is not the complexity. That can easily fall into a God of the gaps problem. The real challenge is how a good God can not only create that way and allow for it, but within the central texts and ideas, blame humanity for them. That is a fundamental questioning of the ethics and morals of God, even from the standpoint of the theology being presented, right? This is not the issue of, God is just, or God is holy, or God is this, and he's allowing us freedom. No. This is worse than that. It's, look at the wonderful world I made, by the way, it's your fault. What? That just doesn't... There's a fundamental, I think, disconnect there. And unfortunately, most, especially Orthodox theologians, are either pure fundamentalists, young Earth creationists, or they pretend that there's no problem. And I'm like, hey, you can't do that. Be honest with it. Every solution to this issue is going to have a problem. Okay, at least be honest about what those problems are, and try to find workarounds or figure out how it can work. So, anyway, with that, I got to go to bed. It's 2:45. I have a Friday lecture. I'm going to go see Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And then I'm going to grade plenty of final drafts on research papers and write the final. So, Christ is risen.